Today we're going to talk about finding a number when a percent of it is known. So let's say that we start with this first problem. 4.2% of what number is 2.31? So what we're looking at is setting up a proportion. And we learned in the last lesson that whatever follows the word of goes in the denominator. Well, in this case, what number follows the word of? And whenever you see the expression what number, you're going to put x in its place. So let's see how this works. We have 4.2%, which we can write as 4.2 over 100. Create your fraction on the right side. The word, or I should say the expression or the variable x is what's going to follow the word of. So that goes in the denominator. That's our unknown value. That's our what number. What's left over, the 2.31, has only one spot to go in, and that's in the numerator. And now we can go ahead and solve our proportion. We're going to say 2.31. See if I can get my pen to work a little better. 2.31 times 100 divided by 4.2. Well, if you have 2.31 times 100, we end up with 231 divided by 4.2, and so we end up with x equal to 55. Let's move on to our next problem. 20 is 255, this should say percent here. 20 is 255% of what number? Well, whatever follows the word of goes in the denominator, and what number follows of, and that we always call x. So let's write down what we know. 255% we can write as 255 over 100. Set up your fraction. X follows the word of, so it goes in the denominator, and what's left over, the 20, is going to have to go in our last empty spot in the numerator. Now we're going to go ahead and multiply. So we're going to say 100 times 20 divided by 255. Well, 100 times 20 gives us 2,000 divided by 255. So x gives us 7.84. Next, let's take a look at this word problem. Joanne took Anne-Marie to a restaurant for lunch. Joanne left a tip of $5.25, which was 15% of the bill. How much was the bill for lunch? Now, one of the things we can do is let's try to rephrase this problem in a manner that's familiar to us. Well, we know that 15% of some number gave Joanne $5.25. So let's see if we can rephrase that. We're going to say 15% of some number. Let's call it what number, since we've used that in some of our other problems. 15% of what number is $5.25. Now that looks a little more familiar to us. So now let's set up a proportion and solve. 15% we can write as 15 over 100. We know that whatever follows the word of goes in the denominator, and the expression what number follows the word of, we'll call what number x. So we know x is going to have to go in the denominator, and then $5.25 will have to go in the last empty spot in the numerator. So now, let's go ahead and solve the proportion. So we're going to say 100 times $5.25 divided by 15. Well, 100 times $5.25 gives $525. And $525 divided by 15 gives us $35. So the bill for lunch must have been $35. Let's move on. We're going to look at some different types of percent problems as well, how we can see how they're set up a little differently. Let's say we're given this problem. What percent of 80 is 4? Now, this is a new expression for us. Whenever you see what percent, you can write that as x over 100. That's what we're looking for. What number over 100 means what percent? So let's go ahead and set up a proportion. So what percent is x over 100? The number that follows the word of goes in the denominator, so that's 80. And anything that's left over goes into the last empty spot. Now we can go ahead and solve the proportion. So we're going to say 4 times 100 divided by 80, which gives us 400 divided by 80. So x is 5. Now the thing is, x isn't just 5. Remember, it's asking what percent. So we want to be sure to say that x is 5%. Okay, or that your answer is 5%. X is 5, but the answer to the question is 5%. Now in this problem, 36 is what percent of 144? Remember, the expression what percent can be written as x over 100. So let's write that down in our proportion. The number that follows of goes in the denominator, and so that number is 144. And what's left over, the 36, goes in our last empty spot. Let's go ahead and solve now. So we have 36 times 100 divided by 144. Well, 36 times 100 gives us 3,600 divided by 144 gives us 25. Now remember, we were asking what percent, so the answer is actually 25%. $16 is what percent of 80? Remember, what percent is written as x over 100. So we'll start with that in our proportion. The number that follows the word of goes in the denominator, so that's 80 that goes down below. And 16 goes into the last empty spot in the numerator. We're going to go ahead and solve the proportion. So we say 16 times 100 divided by 80. So we have 1600 divided by 80, which gives us a value of x to be 20. Remember, we were asked what percent, 16 is what percent of 80? So we'll write that answer as 20%. Now, find 23% of 400. This goes back to the types of problems that we were doing in a previous lesson. 23% can be written as 23 over 100. 400 follows of, so it goes in the denominator, and then our unknown value x will have to go in the last empty spot in the numerator. Now we'll go ahead and solve. So we have 23 times 400 divided by 100. 23 times 400 gives us 9,200. Divided by 100 gives us 92. So x is 92. Moving on to the last page. Sue received $50 for her birthday. She spent $35 on a sweater. What percent of her money does she have left? Well, first of all, let's see how much money she has left. So $50 minus $35 gives us 15. So she has $15 left. And let's see if we can phrase this in a way that's familiar to us. $15 is what percent of 50? So we want to know what percent of her original amount of money does she have left. So let's go ahead and set this up as a proportion. We know what percent can be written as x over 100. The number that follows of the 50 goes in the denominator. And then what's left over, the 15, has to go in the last empty spot. If we solve this, we have 100 times 15 divided by 50. Well, 100 times 15 gives us 1,500. Divided by 50 gives us 30. So she has 30% of her money left. This next problem. A football stadium has a seating capacity of 1,000. It shouldn't say dollars. Let me just cross that out. Just 1,000. What percent of the stadium was filled if 850 fans showed up? Let's see if we can rephrase this into something more familiar to us. What percent of 1,000 is 850? So what I'd like you to do, please, is I'd like you to set this up and try to solve that before the next class. And then we can take questions on it at the very beginning of the class period. Thank you for joining me today.